This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Paul Banas, publisher of GreatDad.com and Pregnancy Magazine. Welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Thanks, Phantom. Yep, doing great.
Want to let you know that we do have your website, https://www.greatdad.com. That will be fully clickable on the URL there when we're published on any of the platforms. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch right now, but we will be on all the major podcast platforms by tomorrow, and you'll be able to click through on your website there. We also have to mention that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly Network, and if anybody wants to check that out, they can use that coupon code GHOST. However, one of the first couple of questions we ever ask any guest before we get into the meat of the conversation is, why do you do what you do, and what motivates you?
Yeah. So why I do what I do right now, after having started GreatDad.com and worked on Pregnancy Magazine, I'm working as a coach supporting fathers, and that really, if it hadn't been clear to me 15 years ago when I started GreatDad.com, that's really my why. What I try to do is help support fathers and support involved fatherhood. And if you go back in time, the reason for a lot of guys who do either podcasts or websites involved with fathering is that they didn't have a father present in their house. So I'm trying to make up for that gap and help other dads, the ones that are physically present but emotionally absent, make sure that they, realize how fast time flies and how you got to get in there and be a good dad with your kids.
Now, in this space, do you find that you have like any competitors or other people doing what you do? Because I understand a lot of times like you see parenting magazines seem to be more like female focused, and I've never really heard of men doing what you're doing. So like I've done a lot of podcasts, and you're the first one to actually bring this topic up. So
that's
like one of the only ones in this space, or are there other people in this space?
Well, it's interesting because I started GreatDad.com back when all the websites, there weren't more than a half a dozen other guys doing even websites. We're not talking podcasts or anything else, but just websites about fatherhood. So there was a real absence. And our tagline, our website is because dads don't always think like moms. And I thought there was a need to have a dad's voice, because moms sometimes, if you're a dad and you got a mom often says that there's a way to do it, and dads may do things differently. Like I empty the dishes out of the dishwasher, but I do it like through steps of like 10 at a time. Every time I go through the kitchen, I take another couple out. For my wife, that's like, oh my God, that's a horror show, So dads need to be confirmed that the way they're doing parenting is not wrong. It's just different. And there have been studies that show that some things that dads do that moms don't do, like roughhouse play, for example, when you jump on the bed with your kids, you throw them all around and everything. Moms very rarely do that. But the studies show that is a way that dads socialize their kids, get them used to controlled danger, and help them learn how to take risks. And there are many, many things like that dads do. So to your point about competition, there are still many, many more websites for moms. That's true. But and I don't consider it competition, but there are now, thankfully, a lot more websites and podcasts for dads supporting the same mission.
Well, it's kind of more like a collective. Like I'm a musician. Like if we hit a club, you can hit that club together, or you can be like thinking that it's a battle of the bands. So if you're in a collective, like we're all there so we own the club, or it could be a battle of the bands. It's like, no, it's like we're all still in the same community. So if we can help each other, that's always good. But
yeah, because there's no money. There's very little money to be made in helping dads. So I don't think I see it as like a competition. If we can all just do a little bit more to make the world a better place, I am perfectly happy at my stage of life to do that.
Yeah, because it's important, because a lot of men, even if they're there, like my father was a salesman.
Yeah.
And he was home, but he really wasn't home, because he was in this kind of marketing mindset, and he was like always on. And so even though he wasn't like divorced, like we didn't really see him that much. Yeah. So it's like if you have like the CEO kind of mentality, work is the thing, right? Yeah. So then even if men are present, are they really present?
Right. Yeah, and I don't I don't try to put any value judgment on other families. You know, there are a lot of people who are really struggling in the world today and in the country today. And if you're working a job at McDonald's and then you're turning around and working at a,
Talk
as
about,
or something else to make ends meet, you're doing what you can. And, brother, just keep the food on the table. That's important. But on that same token, if you have limited time with your kids, don't spend that time on TikTok. You have to spend that extra time then focusing on them and being present when you do have time with them.
Yeah, like sometimes like the father might be there, but he's just watching the game. You
Right.
can't really interrupt him, or he's listening to Nat King Cole. You can't interrupt him. So it's like you're there, but how have you taken away? Have you figured out a way that when you have the precious time, right?
Yeah.
How you use that time to connect to your kids, so it's not just one parent really molding your children. Like, and so
Right.
like how do you, and don't you want to have an effect on your child's development?
Yeah. I love the example of the sports, because there are two ways to watch sports, right? I mean, like you say, you can either like shut up, I'm watching my sports, or you watch it with your child. And when they're young, they're doing whatever you want with you. And if you actually, my son at age about, I don't know, 6 or 7, he started watching football just like I don't know, we were at just the TV went on. I'm a Vikings fan, so they were in the playoffs for once, and he started watching, and then that became a thing, and I reignited my own interest in football, and now watching football is a thing that I do with him. I don't do it with him by my side, but we talk football, we talk smack, we talk,
you include him.
We include him, and it's part of our relationship, not something I'm doing to get away from him or have my own.
Yeah. Because I think it's like sometimes people have this kind of stoicism where they get into this thing, or this kind of top down structures. Like, well, dad's home, he's the king of the castle. He needs his quiet time. You can't bug him, and like at least I don't know. I've been in in the African American kind of world, that sometimes like the men are in this kind of like, don't do as I do, do as I say, because I said it.
Yeah.
And this is my space, and don't like this. There's a hierarchy.
Yeah. I think that's
in the hierarchy, you got to understand it.
and I think that's generational too. I mean, I'm hoping that is changing little by little, that we all realize, the role that we're playing as dads, and part of that involves destroying that kind of hierarchy where, dad is the king and everything goes, and he doesn't have to answer to anybody, and he's emotionally absent even if he's physically present.
Yeah, that's like kind of old school. Like, and just coming from my perspective, what I remember of my uncles and my grandparents, and people in my structure of my family, and then other friends that had the same thing, and they were like, "Wow, is that the way it's got to be?" And as now as parents, like, we're saying, well, maybe it shouldn't be like that. Like, maybe we should, learn how to change diapers.
It starts with those. That starts with those kind of steps. Yeah, I mean, I think the earlier you pick up on that, if you support your partner when she's pregnant, and then chip in on the diapering and the sleeping and the feeding and everything else, you establish that bond early on that continues. And later on in life, I'm a little bit older than you are, but with kids, you look back. And the influence that you have in the family you have is your biggest legacy. I don't care if you made $1 billion. If you're Elon Musk and you've got 20 kids all running around the country, you don't even know who they are. I'm sorry, I don't have as much respect for you as a guy who stepped up and was a present father, because that's what makes the world better. His
trust fund might not
rockets
actually satisfy. The trust fund might not be enough.
Right.
Yeah,
even if it's $1 billion.
I went to school with like trust fund kids. I went to like Bowdoin College. My brother went to Harvard, went to Brown. We ran into the trust fund kids.
Yep.
And we ran into kind of some of the social problems they had. Now, they had everything, but I could see them having all these problems. And I'm like, wow, this kid has a Porsche, but he has all kinds of problems. Like even though his father gave him all this stuff, but he was carted away to some, academy, and he never sees his parents. So he has all this freedom, and then he really doesn't feel like his family is there. even though
Yeah.
they gave them everything. I could see these kids and they would be like bawling out and crying and having these crises. And I'm like, wow, I didn't really see that they would have those problems. I was like, oh, they got money. They
Yeah.
won't have any problems. But it's like they had tons of problems.
Well, yeah, I think we need to break down that paradigm of, it's the name school and the big job and the Porsche, like you say. That's not how ideally we evaluate success. It is a monetary valuation of success, the definition of success. But later on in life, you question a lot more of that than when you do. If you learn it a little bit earlier, maybe you'd have a happier life, in my perspective.
Yeah, just to find it like the simple things is like just my dad being there, right? To
Yeah.
actually showing you, like, my dad, the biggest thing to become a musician, what he introduced me into his love of music. Like,
Yeah.
and he loved James Brown, he loved Nat King Cole, he loved Stevie Wonder, and he'd actually teach me like how to listen to a record. And that's why how I
Yeah.
got to get into music, because he would be getting into all the details of
Uh-huh.
like what's going on in these songs
Yeah.
and really like listening to them like you read a book. And
Uh-huh.
so since he was such a big fan, it got me into music and an appreciation of not just being like background, but he had this passion, and then that passion kind of translated to me. It's like wow, and I felt really cool when I was actually listening to him, listening to James Brown, or listening to through the songs in the key of life. They're like wow, not just you know hearing it kind of like as background, but really diving into what it was, every all the elements and it's like whatever your dad can bring to you to make you want to get into, like you said, the sports. Like if you can get into that, get into something you can share,
Yeah.
then
I'm curious. I'm
then
curious.
you communicate something.
I'm curious. Did he start doing that when you were relatively young and just
Oh,
start
very
talking
young.
about? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, very very
Yeah.
young. He always spent Saturdays nights listening to his record collection, and he, unlike the sports where he didn't really pull me in as much, he did pull me into that.
Uh-huh.
And he did kind of describe and didn't just sit there. He actually interacted. So I started to like have an appreciation for like all types of music, and he's into Brubeck and Davis and Coltrane and Sun Ra, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, he has a very varied listening. The Beatles, like it's like so for like it's a very. It just got me into looking like music could be a lot bigger than
Yeah.
than I ever thought, because he opened up a world that's very expansive in that way, where he was kind of narrow in other ways, but he's very expansive there. And I was like, wow.
I
I still
I
remember it to
love.
this day. He passed on.
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, that's a legacy thing, and that's where you probably feel a big part of your connection with him is that sharing of something. And I think a lot of dads don't understand that there's a time frame in that the evolution of the child and the father that's relatively small. We think of the family being this long term thing, but if you think of that, they're only kind of moving around and sentient to like 3 or 4 years old. I mean, before that, they're kind of like a blob, and they're cute and everything, but you don't have as a man, you don't have as much of a relationship. Your wife has a relationship that's very physically oriented, but you start developing that relationship somewhere two plus on. And then, you've got until about the time they're 11 or 12 before they quite naturally start pulling away from you. Now, if they've developed this thing that you have in common, when they hit 12, they may turn away from you on a bunch of other things, but you still got that key thing that you
One
will
thing, yeah,
still
the
keep
key
on
thing.
discussing into your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s if you've done it right.
Yeah, I think it's real important to have that kind of relationship, and then also maybe we can talk about the idea of positive intelligence and what that means from like a father's point of view. 'Cause I think we've heard terms like that, and I've had a lot of female therapists and life coaches on, but I want to kind of understand positive intelligence from your point of view.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm using a technique called positive intelligence, which maybe people would think like that's emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is probably a lot more connected to direct communications. Positive intelligence, and I built it into a larger program that also is kind of a resilience training, but it prepares you to have a more positive reaction to the everyday challenges at work and at home. It teaches you how to recognize negative voices in your head and what those voices are telling you, that like the type of voices you have, you're no good, they're no good, the situation's no good. And that is an evolutionary mechanism that's alerting you to a problem. So recognize it, and then you learn how to stop it, but then turn your reaction to something more positive, whether it's, something that you do or something that you work out with a situation or with the other person who you perceive as the problem, right?
Gotta retrain your triggers, like remap your brain.
Yeah, no, it really is true. Is that whole remapping your brain 30 or so years ago, everybody thought that the brain was not possible to change. You were stuck with that brain that you had, and now we just take it for granted that we are able to rewire our brains, and this is one way to do it. It takes practice.
It's the ultimate computer.
Sorry.
Well, it's the ultimate computer. It's the ultimate computer. I'm a software designer, right? So I know like the software computers can be remapped all the time. That's all we do. We change we reorganize and restructure, and we have mapping. We go through this kind of process of mapping what the computer is going to understand, given it the large learning libraries that we give it today with AI. But before that, we actually built these data structures to define things. What are the 0 and 1s that represent this? And now we can do a little bit more than that. But the fact is that your brain's even more complicated than any computer that's ever been built. And
I'm wondering if maybe you were more aware of that than some of us laymen were, about the fact that you could see that mimicking, that the software design and redesign that you were doing mimic the way you knew your own brain was.
I started to see logic. I took philosophy when I went to Bowdoin. I took some, a lot of, sociological courses, and then I took a lot of science courses in terms of like computer programming, and I started seeing like parallels within like human behavior, and then how we we teach a computer is kind of like very basic at the beginning, and then as things got more complicated and exponential over the years, we've been able to kind of train them to a point that now we have AI, right? And we have robotics and all this automation. But at the end of the day, I saw it was like, well, you can remap and reprogram. We started hearing about people getting programmed in cults. Like I remember like Jonestown and all the, Heaven's Gate. It's like, well, seems like people can get programmed like the computer can get programmed.
Yeah.
And then you can look at it at a microcosm level. You can look at it at a macrocosm level. So you can have like a group being programmed or an individual being programmed. So like, oh, that's not that different than what I'm doing with this code in Pascal or C or I'm telling this computer exactly what to do, and it's garbage in, garbage out. It's like whatever I give it is like I'm limited by what I told it to do.
So I'm interested. You mind if I ask you a question? Because you're a humanist. My son's also a philosophy major, so I get a little insight into what your education was like. But you're a humanist and you're a software designer. And other engineers that I talk to about AI, quite frankly, their imagination seems to be very limited about the potential for AI. Whereas I find humanities majors and people who are in the arts are more like, oh my God, the potential is huge.
Well,
and I talk to PhDs who say, no, we'll keep it in the box. Don't worry.
No, there's a problem already. We've already seen. The problem is like, you get a technologist and they go for the mountaintop without considering the philosophical, right? So I'm a kind of a liberal arts major, right? So I look at the philosophical, I'm not just an engineer. So I think about Plato, I think about Camus, So it's like okay, like I wrote this kind of concept as a song called "The Biases in the Machine," because they just did a study and they were checking like one of the AI platforms. I won't say which one it was, but people with like disabilities on resumes, the AI was actually ranking them in a worse way, in a derogatory way compared to people who were able-bodied, right? So it was doing ableist type of behavior. Well, it was doing ableist behavior, kind of garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And then the problem with the technologists is, oh, that's just pure logic. It's going to do the right thing. But what is it? What are you teaching it? If you're teaching it something that you already have a bias and you don't even know you have a bias, then people think, oh, this is perfect. So there's a lot of danger in thinking that something's perfect because it's like, what, you're perfect? There's nothing. What it's learning on is imperfect human knowledge, right? Which in itself, and then you're trying to tell people like make these decisions because this now it's like perfect. It's like, really? Do you not see the contradiction in that?
yeah. I mean, that's one of the biggest arguments for diversity is that if you don't have diversity of input, if that input is completely lacking, how do you expect it to represent all of us rather than just a small microcosm from which it got its input? Anyway, we're off subject completely, but
yeah. I mean, if you ask something to represent what's beauty to AI, it's going to represent what beauty it's been taught on.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if what's been taught on is limited, it's not going to see everybody. It's going to see what it was trained on. And so that's the big problem. And people have to kind of like understand like regulations, privacy controls, rules are not built into it. So if you will do stuff beyond your law, beyond your morals, because it can. And so just because it can, does that mean it's right just because it can do it?
Yeah.
Right. So so I think it's like kind of teaching kids like lessons learned when you teach your kids like, oh yeah, you could be strong and you could bully this kid and you could do that, but is that the right thing to do? You think your dad would teach you like maybe you shouldn't bully somebody who's smaller than you, weaker than you, or has like there's no reason to lord it over people, right? It's actually better to like try to get along. But if you teach them like, yeah, whoever's got the might is right, well, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah. And if they look at history, that may be the larger lesson rather than, trying to do better.
Trying to do better. Yeah. Like, so you have to kind of think about like your tribal knowledge or your family knowledge. It's like, well, grandpa did this and great grandpa did that, but was that actually right?
Yeah.
Right. Just because they did it, does that mean it's right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of the work that I do is like trying to question some of that background and do things in a different way.
So I think like I guess as advice for new dads, one of the things I did was like I participated when my daughter was born. I participated heavily in the whole maternal process. I took courses with my wife.
Right.
I was there at the birthing in Northampton, Mass. I was in the room. I had been through the classes. I did the breathing exercises. I didn't like have like my father or my grandfather's kind of like, be in the hallway with the cigars. I was actually in the room.
Yeah.
So from that point, it was like changing the diapers, learning how to feed her, learning like everything that my wife was doing so I could actually be a partner and be there from the start. Which was not what men had done in my family.
Yeah. The great thing about that, I don't know if this was your experience, but the reason that my website is called greatdad.com is that the minute you start doing that stuff, even if you do it like 10% or 5% or just make an effort, you're immediately like, oh, he's such a great dad. He actually showed up. Whereas if a website called greatmom.com, that does not exist because moms have this, ridiculously high standard. But dads, if you want a little bit of positive affirmation in your life, show up for your kids, and the women go wild. Of course, now you're married, that's not going to help you too much. But but you get what I mean. You get a lot of positive feedback when you show up.
Yeah, I remember my wife's girlfriends were like so shocked.
Yeah.
That she had a guy that was willing to do what I was doing. So it's like, that's like, well, uncommon. I guess I'll be involved. I went to college and my wife went to Mount Holyoke. I went to Bowdoin. We were kind of in this like age where we were reading and looking at stuff and questioning what our parents had done. And we had the conversations while she was pregnant about what we were going to do different than what our parents had done. We actually had the conversation. Is that something that you kind of encourage men to have that kind of open conversation with their wives, like at the very beginning?
Well, I think ideally you'd have that conversation when you're dating about what kind of parenting style you want to have, because there are different, there are different philosophies about this. For example, not everybody might know the word ferberization, but that's the overall uh, name for letting babies cry it out when they're trying to go to sleep. And the other perspective is to comfort the baby. If the baby's crying, they're either tired, hungry, wet diapers, and there's a reason for that. They're crying because they need help, not because they are problematic. So that's two different philosophies. Not in the same, if you're not the same wavelength like that, you're looking at your partner like, what kind of cruel person are you, or what kind of permissive person are you who's going to let our child be crazy wacky sometime. So I think that early on, that's the kind of conversation I have a course called The Intentional Father, where I help dads maybe lead the discussion with their partners about what kind of family they want, in terms of what kind of values they want to transmit to their kids. And that may be cultural norms within your group. It may be religious values. It may be just other humanist values. Like, I want them to be honest, generous, kind. Well, if you say that those are our family values, you need to set that out early on. You talk about those values, you bring them up over the dinner table, you model those kind of things, you volunteer to soup kitchen, or you do whatever it is that shows those values. And then you have a better chance that your kids are actually going to, be the way you wanted them to be at the outset.
Yeah, it's kind of like the idea. Like, I think one of the things questions you read to answer was like, empathy, and how it can build. And when there's empathy between you and your partner, and then empathy, that's like a microcosm level, within your personal relationships, and then it's for the greater world, right? The empathy for your neighbors. Like, do you ever ask your neighbor how they're doing? Are they having a good day? Do they need some help? Do you extend that to people you don't know? Do you extend that to like having empathy for the other or some other group? Without making, everybody makes judgments. We're human, but the idea that you have some empathetic tendencies to not have the judgment come in and say, well, it's the other problem. They cause their own problem.
Well, it's kind of like that positive intelligence thing. It's that warning signal. Okay, there's somebody else who's the other. And in our culture, quite often, this person doesn't look like me or doesn't have the same sexual preferences I do. They're the other. And I've trained evolutionarily. It's not evil necessarily. It's only evil if you act on it. But you have to you need to relearn a response to that, so you don't jump to negative conclusions. You try to think of like different circumstances. They may not look like you, but they're a human being, and there are ways to we can all live together. Empathy is one of the biggest things that we lack, and that is the healthiest for us as individuals as well, to feel good about ourselves and what we bring to the world. But it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge because empathy for yourself, empathy for your family, and then empathy for other people who are going through rough times, whether it's somebody who cut you off in traffic or whether it's somebody who doesn't look like you. I mean, a lot of that is we have snap judgments, and we have to fight those judgments with our rationality, with the fact that we should be better people than we were before.
Well, I think a lot of times it's fear and anxiety, and so we in the modern world compared to the old world, it's like the wolf at the door was a real wolf. It was a real saber-tooth chasing you around. Now the wolf at the door is somebody cut me off. Somebody said something I don't like. Somebody looks like somebody I don't like, right? And so now you're getting triggered, like the wolf's at the door, like right now. You're in the middle of the world, and then somebody looks like something has a sign that triggers you, and it's like, boom, you're fight or flight, and you're right there to fight, right? Yeah. And it's like, well, is that really appropriate for that moment? Do you have situational awareness to realize that's not really the wolf at the door?
And it's such an immediate, visceral response that you shouldn't feel guilty that you have that response. It's what you do with that response, whether your rational mind and the way you train your brain can take over and say, put it aside. The guy who cut me off, he's having a bad day. He's racing to the hospital to take care of his, his wife, a million one reasons why he maybe cut you off, rather than making him be the demon who ruined your day.
Yeah. It's just like, even like, if you to the self-talk, that, like, self-defeating, like imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be enough. I shouldn't even raise my hand because I might look stupid for saying
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And, a lot of times today, people are so into perfection, or they're into being like, keeping up with the Joneses, kind of clone culture, copying, and then not having fear for the vulnerability of the individual self, which is your actual superpower. But
Yeah.
we're kind of being told, oh, we got to fit in. Well, it's what you have as an individual and what the other has as an individual, what makes everybody worth being around.
Well, yeah,
if you
but
look at it that way.
yeah, if you focus all the time on other people, their Porsche, their house, their trip, or whatever, consider, do you feel close to them? Are they do they make you feel good when you get together with them, when you're having those type of emotions? Or if you're trying to do that, people want to be with people who try to understand, who are vulnerable enough to say that I'm a weak, unperfect person as well, and we're trying to, we're trying to get better and have a relationship. We're not having a competition, and
Yeah.
it's a real struggle in our culture to fight that response. But I love the way you framed that.
Well, you think about, like, I'm a child of the '70s, and what I kind of they use as an example is, like, you think about James Taylor, I Seen Fire, I Seen Rain,
Yeah.
right? In the singer-songwriter era, the Carole Kings,
Yeah.
the Tapestry and things like that. When you see people that were willing to be vulnerable and tell a story that was very personal, and then it kind of, it hit a frequency which said, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not just trying to sing a song to be popular. It became
Yeah.
popular, but it was popular because it struck a chord. It hit like a universal note. And then today we have singer-songwriters that just braggadocio. I got this, I got that. You should try to have it too. I'm the best. It's like, well, where's the vulnerability in that? Like, where's actually trying to build some empathy and, so, like, the looking glass self that the romantic poets talked about. I
Yeah.
go into, like, that William Blake and Tennyson and Wordsworth and, all that stuff. It's like this idea, like, you're going to look into yourself and pull something out of it, and then try to, analyze, like, why are you feeling that way, and then put it into words. It's the artistic power, is that you
Yeah.
take those things that happen to you and you turn it into art.
But so
And you don't just do it for a million views or a million listens. You do it because you want to connect.
you listen to a lot more music than I do, and I don't know Taylor Swift, but from what I hear in the zeitgeist, it sounds like she's one of those confessional people who is, even though she's
Yeah.
attractive and billionaire and everything, she lays her
Oh, she's
soul on the
trying.
line.
She's in
And
that zone. Yeah, she's
and
in that zone.
women love her, and even a lot of men love her because she's always failing at love and failing at relationships, and they must see something real in
Yeah,
that.
she's
So
like the
I
Carole King of our time.
maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's like at the zeitgeist of that, like today, like probably what, but in an era where you had the Dylans and the Joni Mitchells and the Neil Youngs, there's not as many people that I would argue that in the age of the singer songwriter, she's like one today.
Yeah.
But in that age, you just rattle them off. They just like boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, boom. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so there's my point to a lot of young, producers and musicians is like, don't be scared to be vulnerable. Don't try to match Taylor Swift or clone her. Do what is you. Like, your secret sauce is your demo that doesn't sound like anybody else, right?
Yeah.
Rather than trying to sound like her.
Mhm.
And I think people are scared of that. People are scared of vulnerability, right? And if you're a man, like, a lot of times, if you bring it down to it, like a man being a parent, is like, are you scared to show your children that vulnerability? And from your perspective, is it important for a man to show, some of those kind of vulnerable aspects when they're teaching their kids?
Oh, for sure. I think you are a far better far better parent or far better father if you can admit when you've made a mistake. Luckily I haven't had thousands of experiences like this, but when I've yelled at my kids or said something bad, going back to them an hour later and saying, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that, goes a long way to developing that relationship and creating more trust between the two of us, because they realize that you're human as well and you're vulnerable. My father, when I was a child, we'd only see each other maybe twice a year. He lived on the other side of the country from me, but we ended every phone call by him saying, I love you. And me saying, I love you back, because I was a little kid and I just followed his lead. His wife, at one point, I was probably like 16. She said, what the hell is this I love you business? You sound like you're gay or something, saying that to your son. And you can just imagine his reaction was like, we're living on the other side of the country and you want to take away just a basic expression of love with my child. That did not go over very well. Yeah.
That's a little, I can see that. That didn't go down that well.
But I think to your point,
that's interesting. How
go ahead.
No, it's the idea that men are not supposed to show that level of emotion. That if you express the love for your children, that somehow that puts you into like, that's being like, that's being gay, that's being a homosexual. Like, what's wrong with saying that you love your kid, right? What's wrong if a dad cried when he's watching Charlotte's Web? Like, is there something wrong with that? Some people would say, well, yeah, there is. You shouldn't do that.
Yeah, just on the face, the whole comparison was kind of evil to begin with. But but yeah, I think that's but it's also a challenge in our day and age as we as men try to recapture what positive masculinity is rather than toxic masculinity. And we can be loving, generous, caring people and still be masculine. That's not antithetical to being masculine. In fact, one of the big parts of being a man is being a protector, a provider, a service provider, and showing love that way. So why can't we do it in other ways? I'm really working through that myself in trying to establish what are the positive masculine traits that we can hold on to and fight to come back to tamp down this whole idea that all men are bad or all men are toxic. Because I don't think.
I think that's the problem. Is sometimes it's like men think like, if I'm going to be Mr. Mom, then I'm going to lose my masculinity, right? Because if I'm going to decide to stay home with the kids and my wife goes to work, then somehow I'm going to lose my masculinity because I'm wearing the apron or I'm doing chores that are kind of gender specific. So then suddenly those chores that were considered gender type chores or roles, then that feminizes you. So that makes you weak, and then you're like, and have this dichotomy. It's like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like then you're like, it's like, can I show those things without losing my masculinity? I think you can. I think people are multifaceted.
Yeah,
you can show parts of your personality that might appear to be feminine to some people, but it's just that's just like the way you show you love, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? So it's like people just have these judgments because they've been stuck in the kind of role-based society that has these mores to say, this is what it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. I feel very strongly about that. Show you love your kids. Give them a hug. Give them a kiss when you get home. Tell them you love them. They will appreciate that and they will remember it.
So the concept of the 5 stages of fatherhood, which I wanted to get into because that seems like a big piece of the puzzle for what you're kind of talking about. So I want to get the overall 5 stages and why do we need to know them?
Well, I think the 5 stages, whether you look at them as 5 stages or as a continuum, the most important thing as a father versus other relationships is that your child is constantly changing and evolving and getting more mature. So you have to be able to modulate your response and your interaction with them based on where they are today, because you don't react to a teenager the same way you react to a 5-year-old, and that's important just as in the whole continuum. Yeah. But if you look at the first stage is they're a baby, And most dads take the baby home and they care for the baby. They like to take the baby out. It's nice to have a baby in the house if they're not crying or not needing to be changed. But most dads don't feel that same bond with the baby as mom does. And I remember this very distinctly. I'm like 3 months in, I'm like, the baby's fine, but I don't, baby, I don't have the emotional bond that my wife had with the baby. And I was taking that on me. I was like, what's wrong with me? Am I sick or twisted that I don't have that emotional connection with my child? But as it turns out, most dads don't. They didn't go through the physical change of having a baby grow inside them. So it takes us a while. Around somewhere between two and three, and I remember this very distinctly too, with my daughter. We were sitting there and I'd gotten her a bowl of cereal and she was eating her bowl of cereal and we started to have, it wasn't an adult conversation, but for the first time it was a little bit back and forth. It wasn't just me spoon feeding her. It was like, some communication. So there's that part, that toddler part lasts for a while and goes into maybe the tweens, when you are so lucky in that time period because your child is portable. You can take them anywhere and they want to go with you. I mean, I was like, I'm going to get a cup of coffee. Oh yeah, I'll come with you, Daddy. Later on, that's not going to be like that. So take advantage of that. To your point, that's when your dad taught you the music and got you really involved because you wanted to be with him, and anything he said, he could have been, showing you anything, and you would have probably been happy to lap it up if you got to spend time with him. So there's that period that's really the time when you have the greatest long influence on them. And then of course teenagerhood comes, and that doesn't have to be a nightmare. Quite often, more often than we want it to be, it is a difficult time, but that's also part of the whole process. They need to pull away from you. Sometimes that's a little bit more abrupt and violent than you want it to be, but it's normal. And you have to get through that by trying to meet them again where they are. I tell dads to, if they're having troubles understanding their teenager, is to get a picture of yourself when you were a teenager. Get a picture of yourself when you were, 14, 15 and awkward and unsure, but also risk taking and all the rest, to kind of bring back those memories of how difficult that time was. That's one thing you can do as a dad. And then finally, when your kids are adults, you have another level of relationship with them that is sometimes that's closer to mentoring than it is to strict parenthood. So the main point about the 5 stages and the need to know them is more to realize that they are changing and evolving, and you need to evolve with them in how you interact.
Yeah, I noticed. I mean, my daughter's like 22 now, and my wife had cancer, so she's been home with us, and she's doing her job remotely. But we really have a lot of things that we connected with, like I did with my dad. Is we connected. She's an artist, and we immediately connected on art when she was very young. I brought her to art classes. We lived in Japan for 2 years. She went to a Japanese school. She learned a lot of things from like Shintoism, but I was always very into everything she was learning about. I had a comic book collection. I found out what she liked in terms of comics. I found out what she liked in terms of art, and we went to art galleries, and then we just encouraged her to become an artist, and now she's like an art director running her own collective, and it's just because we saw where she wanted to go. And I had a tendency where I wanted to be an engineer, I want to be a scientist, but then I saw she's an artist, and because I'm a musician too, I said, you know what, I'm not going to impose that. I'm going to let her go. And then because I really supported her direction, she didn't really rebel as much when in her teens, because we were going to art galleries and she was doing shows as an artist when she was 14, 16. And I was kind of encouraging it because I used to be in bands, and I saw her need to go to do gallery shows. It's like me doing shows in the bar, or at the club. It's like, so I saw, I was like, oh, she's an artist. Maybe she can go further than I did. And so I decided I'm going to be her advocate, and I'm going to be her friend. And I kind of looked at it that way, to have less of an adversarial situation in a time period where you tend to rebel. I supported the things that a lot of parents would have. Oh, well, you can't be an artist. That's not going to be stable. You need to go because get something more solid. I totally went all in on
Yeah.
something that some people probably wouldn't have got all in.
I love that example because that maybe that was missing a little bit from my discussion of the teenage years. Is early in the teenage years when you're figuring out what they want to do. Don't keep on making them go and do things that they don't want to do. But I mean, if they suddenly, they're suddenly into sports or whatever, then you follow them to the sports, or they're like your daughter. If they're into art, suddenly you develop an interest in art because that's what they're interested in, and that builds your relationship. Okay, maybe that's not the thing that you really want to do on a Saturday afternoon, but you're with your child continuing to develop that relationship. And if it's important to you, that's the kind of thing where then you develop a common language around that, and hey, maybe you learn something and grow a little bit through their experiences as well.
Yeah, because it's this interesting thing that you never know which direction they're going to want to go in. And I wanted to go like MIT eventually or stuff like that, and she wanted to go to art institutes. And so there were people in my family. They were like, oh, that's not good. There were elders in their families like, how's she gonna? Is she gonna be a starving artist? And it's like there was a lot of pressure from people in the family to say, well, set her straight. And I'm like,
Yeah,
no, that's where she wants to go.
yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to be said in that story in terms of like, would you rather have a child at 25 who has a passion and is driven by something that they truly adore, or somebody who doesn't have a clue as to who they are or what motivates them? I guess in my life, I'd rather know the thing that drives me and the thing that I have to do to feel fulfilled than to be wandering in the wilderness, hoping to find some excitement.
Well, it's the dream, and I've had so many people on this show that
Uh,
found late in life their childhood dream. And
yeah,
they were a lawyer, they were a doctor, they were an engineer, but they really didn't want to be that.
I
Their
hated it.
kind
Yeah,
of parents led them that way. And
yeah,
then what they really wanted to do, I want to do theater, or I want to be a painter. But
yeah,
they were kind of told that, oh, go get this degree, and then they got it. And then once they got it, they're kind of locked in until they hit this breaking point. It's like they look in the mirror, it's like, I don't actually want to be a doctor.
yeah,
And I was like, so wouldn't it be cool if you could actually do what you love? And it's like radical thing, but people tend to find it like late in life. They find it in their 50s.
yeah,
Do you really want to have to go till you're 50 to figure out that you wanted
yeah,
to do that when you were 20?
yeah, yeah. It's true. I mean, most people are looking at the monetary part only as the only part of the story. And yeah, you got to pay the rent, but there are other ways to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just interesting. We kind of set these goals for our kids, and then sometimes because we're in the kind of parent role, do we realize how much power we have, and are we actually listening with our ears, and our
Mhm.
hearts and our souls to what our kids are telling them? Do you actually listen? This is the question I had. Are you actually, listening to what your kid's saying?
Yeah.
Do you find that you have to talk about like how do you listen to your kid?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as a coach, I recommend everybody take like an intro to coaching class because it's great for that type of listening, that kind of active listening, and the kind of conversations that lead to deeper understanding rather than just a conversation. It's asking provocative questions and asking open-ended questions and pulling some of those threads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I just think that being a parent is hard, and for men, because of our roles in society, it's even harder. In some cases, to really make yourself more involved because maybe there's an expectation that mom's going to do it more than you. Not that you're going to have a certain role that like you're the breadwinner, you're going to provide the safety, you're going to do this, but then the other things that are softer, right? Maybe there wasn't an expectation that you were going to do those things.
Yeah. That is definitely changing. I mean, I think more and more kids expect mom and dad, or mom or dad, to show up, all the time
all the
to
way.
support them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But showing up all the way is like that's a little more than just showing up.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, everybody has a life, and they've got to lead it, and they've got to construct it around this. So you do what you can, but I think that's the difference is doing what you can and what is possible, rather than just saying I can't do it and therefore not doing it at all.
Mm-hmm. Now, one interesting tidbit that you mentioned, like you grew up in like Paris, or you've been in Paris for a lot of different parts of your life, and then you always go back there like once a year. Um, what's so enticing about Paris, and why do you like to go there? And why have you been there so much?
Well, I was lucky enough to work there for 5 years. I was transferred there when I was working for Unilever. So I actually have a lot of friends and like long-term relationships now with people in France. And what can you say? I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's not a place that most people would say no to, but it has become one of our family things that we share. Our kids went to an international school, and they speak French, and we love the different points of view that they've gotten out of that experience, and the international outlook they have, because that's the future.
That's interesting. Because the 2 years I spent in Tokyo, my daughter went to a Japanese kindergarten and a Japanese preschool, and it really formed her art style. Is kind of Shintoism, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of inherent. And so from that 2 years of us only being there 2 years, but living there the whole time, not really going back and forth, it really gave her a different understanding than a kid that just lived in the U.S. That I think I understand from what you're saying. Like if you have that kind of international experience as a kid, it can give you maybe a different view of the world, right?
Yeah, I think it gives you a lot more acceptance of other cultures, not to necessarily just have a reaction like that, we're right, they're wrong. And it also opens up your mind to other possibilities.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I remember like the Eastern mindset, was like it
very
permeates
different.
in our house, like the Shintoism and the Buddhism and Eastern philosophies and concepts are like really core in our household because we were very tied to it. And so we have a different opinion than some people in my community that might come from totally just Christian point of view, and we kind of come at it from maybe a Buddhist point of view or a Shinto point of view or Eastern mindset. And a lot of times we get into conversations with our family and they're like, where'd you get these ideas?
Right. That's so interesting.
That's our experience.
My son, as I said, is a philosophy major, and he's just discovered Eastern philosophy. And so he's bringing that whole part of the world and their philosophy and marrying it with what we in the West have as our philosophical underpinnings. And it's interesting to see him evolve, because I don't have as much of that Eastern philosophy background or history to draw on, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, conversations you have. It's not just the weather. That we can kind of go a little deeper than that. So it's not exactly what you expect, but it's just I think it's just it's really important, I think, to just embrace like what I call expansion, right? In every way. In terms of like a lot of times we have limiting beliefs. Right? That's the kind of common term, and I talk about expansive stuff. Just because when I play music, I like to mix jazz and punk and soul and rock. Because why should I stay in one genre? So in the same kind of thing, it's like, well, why not consider Eastern and Western philosophies or different points of view? And it seems like we're in such a narrow age. It's like, oh, it's black or white, it's yes or no.
Oh yeah, this whole idea of cultural appropriation.
Up or down.
I'm not buying that, because we grow through that expansion that you're talking about. We don't grow by just staying in our lane. That's silly. We've never evolved as a species by not appropriating and pulling from other cultures. I mean, if it's done the
Well,
wrong way, obviously, if you're making fun of another culture, that's wrong. But when you are using, when you're drawing on it, that's respect, that's love. Anyway.
Well, I think being a great dad is pulling from all the available sources of assistance, right? So you look at everything that you can look at, not just the fact that granddad did it this way and grandpa did it that way and great grandfather did it that way. That shouldn't be the only guide to how you're going to proceed in your life. You're not stuck in that paradigm.
Right.
You can be informed by the paradigm, but you don't have to be stuck, or have a ceiling on where you could go with it, because you have your own mind and you can go and check things out and say, does that actually fit our situation? It's like situational awareness for the age you're in.
I mean, but part of that, I think that's what I'm hearing from you, is that I desperately want to believe that we're getting better, that we are getting, we are getting better. Please let us keep on trying to get better.
Well, yeah, I do see a lot of people, a lot of men I've met that have the kind of experience where they did more, right? They participated more. They felt like, it wasn't like an odd thing to do to change diapers. It wasn't an odd thing to do to be kind of like, friends with your kid, and not that you let them get away with everything, not that you don't have rules, but to actually, listen.
Yeah, I can guarantee you will.
Sons and daughters.
You will never regret later on that you changed those diapers, or that you helped out with the feeding, or that you said "I love you" to a kid. You will never regret it.
Yeah, I think it's real important. I mean, the connection. Everything's about like human connection, and the more you can strengthen the human connection, with your own blood, right? Think about it. It's like
start there. Yeah, starts at home.
If you start there, it's going to just expand in your life. If you have a really good connection, right, with your own kids, then you're probably going to have a good connection with your people at work and people on the bus or people on the train. It's like you're going to be able to handle things and triggers and stuff better if you know how to handle it, in the microcosm of your home.
Oh, I love that. I really love that. My wife quite often talks about that anchor, and because she's still I've stayed at home to take care of the kids largely after they started, after like 2, my son was 2. But she's still out there in the workforce, and she's still traveling to meetings and everything. But the fact that she has an anchor, she has a family who she knows is here and that we care for and that we're checking on her and everything, that gives her the strength to carry on some of those, battles outside the house. So in terms of resilience, that's an important component, I think, of building that resilience, is knowing that there is a place where people, they know you, they connect you, they love you, they respect you, all those things. And that takes work and focus. It's not automatic just because you're a family that you're going to act like a family.
Yeah. It's good if you actually have that sense of safety at home.
Yeah.
Like you can build a home that has a sense of safety and like a positive intelligence that you described it, rather than being like, oh no, it's like a storm going on. Like if you can't find shelter at home, it's going to be hard to find shelter anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, we've had our disagreements and fights at home, and I can tell you, when you have that, when you're going through a little bit of that at home, and then you go to work, those are not good days. Those are not good days.
Yeah. But everything's in a continuum. Like it's not expected to be perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. No human being is ever perfect.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that you work to try to have an understanding. Yeah. Like you said, like when you get to rebellious age, there might be a little bit of a storm going on. But like if you can have like not a shouting match, right? You can actually have a conversation. I think that can show that you're okay. I can hear what you're saying. I don't have to control it with the volume.
Well, that's another thing we teach in the course, is how to ratchet down the conversation rather than participating in making it worse.
Yeah. That's a really Well, that's a great place. Maybe we're at the top of the hour, but we do have your website, www.greatdad.com. I want to ask you, like, when people click on your link, what do
Yeah.
they find there? How do they connect with you? What goes on your website?
Well, greatdad.com, the first thing you probably see are going to be some of the podcast links. That's probably the most recent content that we've been added. Actually, if you go to greatdad.com/go, you can see my full offerings from the courses that we talked about. I do a course every other week on finding meaning after 55, because that's a challenge for dads as the kids leave the house, they're facing the end of their career, they're looking at their
Empty
new life
nester.
and trying to figure out what that means, what they're going to do next to fill the time. I also do a monthly meeting. That course is free. I do another monthly meeting on dads with biracial kids and trying to understand and navigate what's going on in the world today and trying to make some sense of it in the way that reflects your values. And the most important thing is keeping on connecting with your kids, because there are challenges related to that. I offer a free discovery call for anybody who wants to have a free hour-long coaching call. I mean, obviously, I'd love it if you decide after that to continue coaching with me, but I'm not a salesperson. That's not a I want to close at the end of the deal. But if you have something that you're trying to work through right now, whether it's trying to figure out the best restaurant for dinner or some larger problem, having somebody listen to you as a coach who can ask provocative questions, who can listen to you, who can try to understand what you really want and need in your life, it's a wonderful thing. And I get a lot out of that because I like having those conversations. I like helping people. So a lot of coaches offer this. Take advantage of free coaching whenever you can, because it really can accelerate your learning about yourself and what you want. So
Well, I do appreciate.
greatdad.com/go.
Yeah, I do appreciate you giving that extra link to go added to it, and people will be able to click on that at the base level and then add to go. But now it's fully clickable everywhere that we're published. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. We're going to be on all the podcast platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast by tomorrow. I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really interesting and wide conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and it was a lot of fun for me.
Well, thank you again.